The seller of today's performance car is one of the most influential names in Australia's automotive landscape, and certainly the biggest to appear on this podcast. The guest today founded the Car Advice website and built it up to be the premier automotive website in Australia, sold it to the largest media outlet in the country, and then has gone on to do it all again and has developed Australia's #1 automotive website, CarExpert. Welcome to the podcast, Alborz Fallah.
Thanks for having me, mate. How are you going?
Yeah, I'm very well. How are you?
I'm very good, thank you. And I want to know, is that background legit, or is it actually like an image that you've just got sitting there?
No, this is a legit background. It's sitting in my man cave.
Literally sitting there. So that's a live photo. That's a live thing. Yeah, okay, there you go. It looks cool. No, there you go.
Yeah.
That's cool. Hey, that's a cool background. I don't have anything cool like that. I should have gone to my garage downstairs, but that's a weird place to sit for an hour.
Well, all good. Look, I think it's safe to say that you're a dyed-in-the-wool performance car tragic. Can you tell us where your love of fast cars started?
Oh man, I mean, how far can you go back? Really, I'm not really sure. I've always been a massive car person. I think it's important to point out the difference. I'm a driving enthusiast as much as I am a car enthusiast. So I literally have no mechanical capability whatsoever. Like I joke that I go to Super Cheap to get my windscreen wipers replaced because I don't want to do it. I'm not saying I can't do it, but I just don't want to do it. Like I get no joy from the, like some people love working on their cars and they call themselves like car enthusiasts. And I love cars. I love what goes into them. But for me, it's all about the drive. It's what I love about the car is how it makes me feel rather than how it's put together or all that sort of stuff, if that makes sense. So my earliest memory is driving my dad's 504, Peugeot 504 when I was like 6, sitting on his lap. And yeah, I don't know. I just always had a thing for cars. I can't really pinpoint it to anything in particular. I think some people are just born that way, right? Like you just love cars.
That's interesting. When I was about 6, my dad had a Peugeot 504 as well.
There you go.
Cool manual. I remember it, but I don't think it was the thing that sparked the love of cars for me. I think for me it was more like the Dukes of Hazzard that got me into cars.
Oh, fair enough. Maybe for me it was just not wanting to own a 504. So it was like I had to find something so much better. It was a pretty terrible car. I don't know, man. I mean, I grew up watching a lot of movies and it has a lot of influence on you. So I kind of like look at it now and go like the car world now is so different to what it was when we were growing up. That's assuming we're a similar age, but you know what I mean? Like it's very different. Like a lot of kids growing up these days don't really have similar aspirations for cars because it's just a different world.
Yeah, look, that is something that, I mean, I want to talk to you about the car you're selling. You're selling a 2010 SLS AMG, but I guess the world has changed quite a bit since that car came out.
Sure has.
That debuted at the 2009 Frankfurt Motor Show. Is that where the car arrived on your radar?
I mean, I was actually there at that show from memory. I wouldn't say so. Like it's for me, Mercedes was always a bit of an old man's brand. It still is in some respects. I always felt like it's very old money. And of all the cars that I own, it's by far the most old money car I have. It looks very understated. It's a very cool car. Like every time I drive it on the road, if I park it somewhere, I like go back and just look at it because it's so long and the proportions are ridiculous and it just looks awesome. But no, my interest, my reason for owning one is because when my wife and I got married, I wanted a wedding car and I was desperate for a wedding car that was cool, but not like, not like some orange Lamborghini or some silly thing like that just looks a bit trashy, I suppose. And that's saying something because I own one. But and I asked around and Mercedes Australia actually said, oh, you've got the perfect car for your wedding. So they gave me an SLS. They gave me a black SLS with red interior. So all our wedding photos around our house have got this beautiful SLS in the background. And I remember like, because, it was in my house at the time and the car was worth more than the house where I was living. And it was just a cool experience to have that car for that period of time. And I drove it from Sydney to Brisbane. And it's a terrible car to drive, by the way. And these windscreen wipers don't work. And it was torrential rain. And it was a really interesting experience. But so when I had the means, I actually bought it for our wedding anniversary one year. And I found the perfect spec, which is the original 300 SL color combo of the silver red And it looks amazing. Like I actually think it's the best example of that car outside of a Black Series, obviously, in Australia. And I have had it for sale for a little while, and I've had some amazing offers, like literally like what I've asked for it almost, and I still haven't sold it. And I've started, as my wife said, she said, "You don't actually want to sell the car, do you?" And I said, "I don't know. Maybe I do. Maybe I don't." But yeah, it is for sale. But so far, anyone that's tried to buy it hasn't got very far with me. So I've really actually started to wonder, and it really made me think about it when you asked me to do this podcast, whether I'm actually selling the car or I've just listed it to know if I could sell the car. But yeah, I love it, but also because it's not a great drive, that enjoyment that I was sort of talking about isn't what I would get from a car of that price point usually, if that makes sense.
It does. And that's an interesting answer for a few reasons. Number one, I didn't expect such a romantic reason for buying the car. I expected something more along the lines of it having the most powerful NA engine that was produced at that time when it came out, and something more along it being faster than a McLaren SLR, but for it to be such
a wedding car, man. It was literally a wedding car. But yeah, that it's a pretty special thing. It's the first ever real AMG. So it's the first car AMG actually built that was their own car, wasn't based on anything Mercedes had done before. The engine was unique. Everything about it was unique. And because it's a Gullwing, you can't build that anymore. Like there's no way you're going to get past modern safety regulations building a car that's not like hyper limited in numbers with those sorts of doors anymore. It's just not possible. Like, you're not going to meet any safety ratings. So it is a pretty special car when you think about it, right? Like it's a modern classic, as much of a modern classic as it could be. That's what it is. And the more I talk about it to people, I actually don't want to sell it.
Yeah, well, I think it was really the pinnacle, because what Mercedes built after that, the successor to that car, was a lot cheaper and probably not as special, not as limited, and it was more a 911 sort of focused fighting car, I guess, the AMG GT, whereas the car that you've got, the SLS, is such a limited number special vehicle.
Yeah, and that reflects in the price, right? Like the SLSs are listed from sort of 700 plus for the coupes. And a GT, I mean, you can get one of the early GTs now in the very low twos. I even heard them going in the high 100s. So bit of a price difference. And the funny thing is the GT is a better driver's car. It's got better steering. It's quicker, but it's just not special. It doesn't have the specialness. It doesn't have the big naturally aspirated engine. It doesn't have the doors. It doesn't look as good, in my opinion. It's a totally different car. And they moved away from the SLS because the production cost of the doors and everything was so much more expensive than just doing a traditional car like the GT. And that's why if you actually go on car sales or somewhere else and look at the SLSs, the convertibles are now like half the price of the coupes. And when they came out, the convertibles were more expensive. I don't know how Mercedes managed to work that one out, but the convertibles were more expensive than the Gullwing. And when I bought mine, they were still more expensive than the coupe. And I looked at that. I said, there is something really wrong there. That market has not corrected, and it's half the price. So I actually would love a convertible though, because it's such a cool car that I reckon with the roof off as well, it would just be epic.
And talking about those Gullwing doors, so this SLS is obviously the spiritual successor to the 300 SL, which was sold after World War II as sort of a Grand Prix type racing car. What are those doors like to live with in real life? Because they're manually operated when you pull them down, but then they sort of got some assistance when you open them.
Yeah, so it's like a hydraulic thing on it that sort of holds it up, and it goes up by itself if you just give it a little bit of a nudge. They're actually genuinely the most useful door I've ever come across, because they need roughly about 15 centimeters from the edge of the car to open, and they only go up, like, I think it's less than 1.8 meters. So it's actually below me when it's open, which means that you can actually open them in places where you couldn't open a normal car door. You park in a tight car spot in a normal car and you try to open the door with 15 centimeters, you're not going to be able to get out, right? The doors are quite thick. With that, it just goes up, and no roof is going to be less than 1.8, because there's plenty of cars that are taller than 1.8. So I actually find that really, really useful. And I'm just amazed that most cars don't have it. But obviously the cost of production is and the safety requirement is quite high. I mean the doors have got explosives in the roof, right? So that if you ever roll the car, they literally blow off the car as you're rolling. so that you don't get stuck in it if it's on its side or upside down. And of course, you can't then open the door. So the engineering requirements to make that thing work and pass the regulations, even back in 2010, was quite daunting. And again, that's why they moved away from it, because you just couldn't keep doing it and selling it for the price they were selling it, because apparently it wasn't very profitable.
And tell us more about this car that you're trying to sell, about how it's so terrible to drive.
Yeah, I know I'm doing a great job selling it. It's not the sort of car you would buy if you enjoy a spirited drive. It is an exceptionally fast car in a straight line. It sounds amazing. It really does sound amazing. I know some people have put like exhaust on it. I don't know why. It's basically like a muscle car. It's a German muscle car. That's probably the best way to describe it. The main thing for me is, and this is what they fixed with the GT, is the steering rack is quite lazy. Right. So it's the sort of car you would do 300 km an hour on the Autobahn with, and you would do it every day, all day long, and it would have no problems. But in Australia, obviously, you can't do that. And, we want to go up somewhere like, in Brisbane, like Mount Glory or something. It's not the car for it. It's not made to sort of do like tight corners and stuff. And to be fair on Mercedes, with the GT, it feels like a 911. So you can do that sort of stuff with it. So that's my only thing. Like I don't usually do long distance drives. When I did drive it from Sydney to Brisbane, it's a different SLS, but that was a fun experience till it started raining, and then I couldn't see where I was going because the wipers just simply don't work. It's so poorly engineered, the wipers. But I'll tell you one thing about the car, right? I've got a bunch of cars, and of all the cars I own, and knock on wood, I have never ever gone to start the SLS and it hasn't started. First time, as if I have been using it every day. And it is still, to this day, running in this original battery. It's 14 years old, the battery that's in that car, and it has never failed. Yes, I've got it on a trickle charger, but you go and buy a modern car today and the battery will be dead in 2.5 to 3 years. Like that car, I don't know, they've over-engineered it. Whatever it is solid. First time, every time. I turned the Ferrari on after like 2 weeks. It's like as if it's never going to turn on again. It like coughs and splats and like tries to like get going. The Mercedes, it's like literally like as if it's never been turned off. It blows my mind. Like yes, I know it's a different type of car to a Ferrari and a Lambo, but the engineering is still something that needs to be discussed. And I think they really did go over the top, being their first Halo car, that they wanted it to be a modern classic even when they built it. So yeah, I think by the end of this podcast, I'm just going to take the ad down and not sell the car.
It's certainly been looked after during your ownership as well. I understand that you have done very minimal Ks in it, and it's been serviced regularly by Mercedes-Benz throughout.
Yeah, it's absolutely, mate. It's I bought the car in Adelaide from its original owner, who was an architect, and I flew in there with my wife, and we were going to drive it back to Brisbane, and then we drove it from Adelaide to Melbourne, and we were like, we're not driving it back to Brisbane, that's just too much. So that was a fun drive though, the Adelaide to Melbourne. It was actually really fun. You sort of look at those things at the time and you go like, oh yeah, we'll do this all the time, but you're never going to do that again, right? You're never going to drive from Adelaide to Melbourne in an SLS. That's literally one of those once in a lifetime things you would do. And then we put it on a truck and sent it up to Brisbane. And I have done, I reckon, 4,000 Ks in, what would it be? It'd be 9 years of ownership. So I've barely driven the car. It gets serviced every year on the dot. And I sort of just take it out to sort of like special events, and Mercedes usually asks for it when there's like an event in one of their dealerships. They get it to come back because it's in exactly the right color spec that you would want it. So it always goes to Mercedes events and sits there because it genuinely, there's not a blemish on it. And I've got it wrapped, and yeah, it's a great car, man. Like I took it to get coffee about a month ago, and I just parked it and I opened the door to get out and get coffee, and like the way people looked at it, it's like I've never seen it before, because they're so rare. Like you ask yourself, when was the last time you saw an SLS, especially the coupe? It's so rare. And it got to the point where like I had to take it to a fuel station, and the guy said to me, he's like, who did the door work on your SLK? And I was like, it's not an SLK.
Oh gosh.
He's like, really? I was like, yeah, it's an SLS. He's like, that's a factory? I'm like, yeah, that's a factory car. I'd never even heard of one. It's quite funny. Almost insulting to call it an SLK, but it was quite funny.
You touched on before that it's not a car that you would take up to Mount Glorious. Is that Mount Glorious, Mount Nebo area your go-to driving spot in Brisbane?
Well, if the police is asking, I've never been there, but otherwise, yes, hypothetically, I do tend to frequent quite a lot up there, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And through the course of your work, being an automotive journalist, you've obviously driven many places around the world. What would be your top three driving locations that you would head to if you had the opportunity?
Oh man, that's a hard question. Hey, I went to this road. This is so far out of the way that it's irrelevant to anyone listening. But I went to this event in Macedonia, in this island where Novak Djokovic at the time was getting married. It was the most ridiculous thing, and I think it was in a Jag event, and we drove up this mountain to this resort, and it was like probably an hour and 30 minutes of just the craziest, windiest roads I have ever driven, with sheep and cattle and just stuff everywhere. It was like a Group B rally movie without police and anything. So that was epic. And then I think the second one would have to be in the Canary Islands, driving a 911 up to the volcano. Canary Islands is unfortunately well known for the two 747s crashing into each other on the runway, but it's also like an active volcano. And again, the road, you're driving up and it looks like you're in Mars. It's just one of the most spectacular sceneries. Honestly, I reckon number three would have to be either Mount Glorious, just because it's 20 minutes from Brisbane and it's so easy to get to, and the road surface is usually really good outside of when you get a lot of rain. It's actually a really good road. Or some of the Targo Tasmania roads, which are pretty spectacular. And Queenstown's got some amazing roads as well. We're pretty spoiled in Australia, though. Like, I've been to a lot of countries that just don't have those sorts of driving roads that we do 20 minutes out of Brisbane CBD. And yeah, that, like, in terms of like the difference between obviously, driving near a volcano or Mount Glorious, it's quite different in terms of the background, but the road quality and the windy and the twistiness is pretty similar. Like, we're pretty spoiled here. So it's pretty good road to have. You just got to go when you're not going to lose your license.
I know it's a topic for another podcast, but they increased the road safety through better resurfacing, and they dropped the speed limits at the same time.
Oh, did they?
Yeah, there's some sections there where it's dropped by 10 k's an hour, I reckon.
I can't say I noticed. Yeah, I have lost my license there once, so it is a familiar territory for me.
You mentioned that you've got some other cars in your garage. I'd love to hear about them, but probably firstly, what I'd love to hear about is, what was your first interesting car that you ever bought, or performance-based car?
Oh, I think it'd have to be my WRX. It feels like it's like a gateway drug into the car scene. Yeah, it's either like a Skyline or a WRX or something like that. For me, it was a WRX, and I bought it because someone I knew had one, and I always wanted one. And then when I had the means, I bought it. And then, like you do, like an idiot, spend more money than the car was worth, modifying it and then breaking things and making it faster and all the sorts of things that you shouldn't do to get more lap time instead of learning how to drive. So I did what most people do, which is like go and do a track day and go, wow, I need way more power, and then spend like 30 grand getting way more power, and then realizing, yeah, that was good, but I actually need to learn how to drive. And that was in my like late teens, early 20s. So it was really good. I literally learned how to drive in that car. I did so many track days in it. I did so many mountain runs in it, so many near-death experiences in it. Think about it. It's crazy that I'm actually here. I did love that car. I really did. And it's actually the only car I ever liked that I sold, because my wife made me sell it because I hadn't driven it in so long. And it gave me so much PTSD selling it. I've never sold a car since. So I literally haven't. I have not sold a car that I like since. The only cars I've sold have been like family SUVs.
Yeah, look, and I'm not sure you're doing a great job of selling the SLS either.
As I said, I genuinely, about 2 months ago, I had a guy who came to my house, who looked at it, who drove it, who gave me within 30 k's of what I was asking for, and I still said no. I want the exact same price and no one's going to get that price that they listed, right? It was just a silly thing to say. I just realized maybe I don't want to sell it, but I always said to myself, if someone actually gives me what I listed it for, then I'll think about it. Other than that, it's so rare. I have not seen another car, another SLS, I should say, in that color combo with the carbon, with that many Ks for sale. I know there's about 4 of them, I think, in Australia, but none of them have come up for sale. There's many of the other ones that come up for sale in other colors, and that's fine. Like, obviously, some people don't like the silver red combination, but in terms of a collector's car, that's the only car you'd buy. 300 SL.
Yeah, that's the one most reminiscent of that, and the classic color scheme.
Yeah, I've literally, I don't know where it is. I was looking for it before. I've literally got an SLS book somewhere behind me, and on the photo, this is the book that was from factory at Mercedes. It's my car. It's the silver with the doors open with the red. And it's like, this is what Mercedes intended the car to look like. And all the photography, and if you look at it, I remember actually in the Valley when I was, very broke, when the SLS first came out, they used to have this ad that used to be out in Fortitude Valley and around CBD, and it had the SLS with doors open. Again, it was silver red, and the ad said SLS OMG, right? And it was just such a cool ad. I just remember it. It's such a cool ad. And like they did such a great job marketing that car. But yeah, it was a halo product for them. But you know what? It was actually a commercial failure. That's the thing most people don't realize. They couldn't sell them. It was right after a GFC, and people didn't want to spend stupid amount of money on a Mercedes, and actually really struggled to sell them. And especially the Black Series. I remember the Black Series. The last two in Australia, they couldn't sell. I think they sold for about $650 to $700. They basically had to discount to give them away. Now those things are worth like close to $2 million, right? So they were an epic car. And if I was to buy another SLS, that's probably what I'd buy. I would buy a Black Series, but I've never seen one come up for sale, ever.
That seems to be a sign that a car is going to go up in value when a company invests so much money in it and then they sell it at a loss. It almost seems like they're the cars that you should buy, like the Lexus LFA.
I was literally just about to say the LFA is the perfect example, right? I had one to buy from Dutton's right during COVID, and I argued over 10 grand and lost it. And it still keeps me awake at night because that's probably one of my favorite cars ever. But yeah, exactly the same case. A car that Lexus lost money on every single one they sold, but they refused to compromise on it, right? And look at it. It's as close to a modern classic as it comes. That car will be forever known as probably the best Lexus ever made.
Would you put the newer generation Honda NSX into that category?
No, okay. that was a pile of crap. I've driven it extensively, and I drove the LFA a lot at a track and also on the road. And it is not very quick. Like it's 4.4 to 100. But it's one of the most sweetest cars I've ever driven. The sound, the steering, just the feel from it. It's like a speciality in many respects. But it actually sounds better. It really does. It actually sounds better. And that's a factory stock Yamaha engine with a Yamaha exhaust. And it's just unbelievable. Unbelievable. If you ever get one that's someone selling one of those, please let me know.
Yeah, I will. I promise. So the WRX you had, was that a GC8 WRX?
No, it was the Pig Eye. I think it was a 2004 model. It was WRC blue. I had ProDrive gold wheels on it with a ProDrive rear spoiler, all sorts of other ProDrive stuff. It's so expensive, so stupid at that age. You couldn't afford to eat, but you had ProDrive stuff on your car. It was a great car. It was a great car. Like, for what it was at the time, man, it was hard to beat. It's a shame actually that the new ones basically haven't changed. It's been like 20 years and the car hasn't really updated. The whole world's moved on, and you got like the likes of Hyundai with their N cars that are just blowing that stuff apart. And WRX and Subarus really haven't moved at all. I mean, they got a CVT in their car. I can't swear.
Yeah, they've gone backwards.
Actually, I've been allowed to swear on this. I've been really holding out.
Yeah. And so from the WRX, you've not sold any of the future cars you bought. What have you gone on to buy since then?
So the next car I bought was my Aston. It was one of those cars that it was one of the first manufacturers first exotic supercar manufacturers that gave me cars when I was starting out at my last business when I was very early 20s. I sort of grew to love the brand and grew to love the car. And it was like when I sold a little bit of my first business, it's the first thing I bought. And the car that I've got is an N400, of which 2 came to Australia.
Oh, wow.
And it's the only one in carousel orange, which was, again, its launch color, right? Like it's a limited numbered car. It doesn't mean anything to someone that doesn't know anything about Astons, because Astons don't really have that collectability like the Ferraris and the Lambos. But yeah, for me, like having a numbered car and a very special color, literally the only one in the country with that color, is very cool. And it's very nostalgic because every time I get into it, it reminds me that I'm not broke. I know it's a weird thing to say, but that's exactly what it reminds me of, because I went from being broke to not being broke, and that car was the thing in the middle. And that's why that car I'll never sell. That'll be here when I die. So it's got my name on it for that reason.
I guess one thing, again, you being in such a unique position, being an automotive journalist, so I'd just love to know, are you excited about the future of cars?
Hmm. I'm more hopeful now than 6 months ago, simply because so many OEMs, manufacturers have come out and said, yeah, that electric thing, we might need to just rethink that a little bit. You had Mercedes come out last week and say, yeah, we're going to go back to the V8s. And they're actually developing an all new V8 for their cars. So yeah, yes, it'll be hybrid. And yes, it'll be turbo. It's not going to be naturally aspirated. But hey, it sure beats having a four-cylinder C63, which, by the way, is actually a really, really good car. It's just that not many people wanted the four-cylinder C63. They want the sound, right?
Yeah.
So I'm a little bit more hopeful. But for me, and I hate to sound like an old person because I'm not, but for me, the pinnacle of automotive is no longer about speed. It's I don't really care. Like I don't really care how fast the car is. You've got a Ioniq 5, and like that thing. You did a whole series of drag race videos where it was beating, Lambos and Ferraris down a straight line. And it's a fantastic car, both on a drag race and on a track. But I just don't care. Like I want to feel scared. I want to feel the engine. I want to feel the gear shifts. I want to feel all of that, and I want it to be real. And it's actually funny because the 5N is probably as realistic making it as possible for that with the gear shifts and stuff, even though it's not really a gear shift. But yeah, look, I'm a little bit more hopeful. But yeah, for me, my era of golden age is the LFA, the Speciales, the V12 Lambos and Ferraris, and I'm very happy that at least Ferrari is keeping the V12 alive, naturally aspirated, without hybrid assist. So maybe we've got another 5 to 10 years to go.
Have you driven the 12 cylindric?
I haven't, mate. I'm really looking forward to it. A couple of the guys in the office drove it, and they had read it a lot. I need to see one on the road. I saw it in person, just sort of static, and it looks pretty good. But it's such a big departure from what has come before that I think it'll take some time for it to grow on me. But like I love the F12. Like that for me is just like peak Ferrari design. Like it's Pininfarina. It's just such a beautiful car, and it looks timeless. You see one on the road now, and I know it's 10 years old, but it just looks absolutely stunning. And with that V12 in it, I can see that sort of stuff. If you're looking to invest in a car, buy that. You get one for like 400 to 500 now, good spec. I don't think it's actually possible to lose money on that car. It wouldn't be possible. Like it's not going to go down.
No.
The 12 cylindry is like 1.2 mil. And I don't think it looks as good.
Sounds like that you're of the opinion that EVs will never be able to replicate that connection that petrol heads have today. Would that be a fair assessment of your current?
Yes, but I also don't think they're trying to. I think, I've got an EV that I drive every day because I need to get from A to B. And for that purpose, which is what 99% of people use a car for, it's perfect. An electric car for daily commuting, it's quiet, it's easy to charge at home. I don't have to go to a petrol station. It makes perfect sense. I kind of liken the automotive world as we live in now to like the horse, right? So back when we had people riding horses, when the car came along, everyone was like, "Oh, this is ridiculous! Like, what would you want a car? Just ride a horse." And this is going to kill the horse trade. Blah blah blah. What happened was that people bought cars, and then the people that actually like horses kept riding horses. Right? Yeah. People still ride horses today, not because they need to get from A to B, but because they actually enjoy riding a horse. And I feel like that's what in the next sort of decade or two, as sort of those cars become super rare or super niche, that's what it'll be. It'll be people that actually want to drive a V12 naturally aspirated because of what it makes them feel, not because they need to get from A to B. And hopefully the regulation will actually allow that, because once the majority of cars are electric, then having 50 to 100,000 petrol cars every year added is going to make no difference at all to emissions globally. In fact, I was having this argument with someone today. I said, people go to a restaurant and they get a bottle of water that is shipped from Italy to drink with their meal.
Yes.
There's literally bottled water from Italy being put on a ship and transferred across the planet for you to. It's the most ridiculous thing. And then you're telling me about what I should and shouldn't drive. It's like, hang on, let's ban imported water because there's everywhere. We can get water here, right? So there's a lot of other ways that we can reduce emissions. That doesn't take away from that. And I think hopefully once the EV uptake is quite high and automotive emissions are quite low, then the regulation and that sort of stuff for niche products would allow it to exist. Hopefully.
The FIA president, Mohammed bin Sulayem, recently mentioned the notion of bringing back V10s to Formula One. I presume that would be running on sustainable fuels. Do you see that as being a future for the ICE?
Yeah, as you're a Porsche guy, I can see one in the background. They're heavily invested in, the sort of synthetic fuels. The point of a synthetic fuel, though, is that it's meant to do the carbon capture. So the whole process of creating synthetic fuels, and they're meant to actually open this plant in Tasmania, which is very behind schedule. But the whole point is that they're meant to capture the carbon out of the atmosphere to offset what they're building with the synthetic fuels. They can build synthetic fuels. That's no problem. The carbon capture part, really hard. No one's really worked that out yet. A lot of companies are trying to work out how to get carbon out of the atmosphere. That part, I think they haven't worked out. It certainly makes sense, I suppose. But at the end of the day, like, we still have a lot of oil left. And if the process of creating synthetic fuels creates more CO2 than just burning the fuel in the first place, it just doesn't make sense. And we got to stop living in this crazy world of using coal-powered power stations to charge EVs and then feel good. That doesn't make sense. We don't have nuclear power in Australia. We don't have, hydropower in Australia. If we did, then yes. I just got back from China last week. I went to this place called Chongqing, which, if you ever want to Google like a futuristic city, it looks like something out of cyberpunk.
That's the thing on the hill, isn't it? It's on a
It's crazy. And I bought one of those stupid Dyson headsets that have that air purifier in them, because I was like, I'm going to go to China. I need like clean air. And I've been to China many times, but I just thought it'd be funny. And what was really funny is that the air quality in Chongqing was better than Brisbane.
Wow.
And you know why? It's because they've got nuclear power and a shit ton of EVs. Everyone's driving around an EV. Like, the absolute majority of cars in that city were electric vehicles, and they're driving around the city. There's no emissions. And guess what? Yeah, the air quality was better than what I got landing back in Brisbane. That goes to show you, like, if you actually do it right, then EVs make sense. But yeah, hopefully as we go down that path, people will buy more EVs and allow people like you and I to continue doing what we love, riding a horse occasionally.
Yeah, agree. So final question. I know you don't have a lot of time. Final question before we wrap up, talking about get back to your SLS. But the other thing I'd be interested in your opinion on is, do you think that the younger generations are going to have the same passion for cars that we had? And how's the enthusiast community going to evolve?
Yeah, I'm still always surprised by how many young people show up to car meets, and all the spotters and photographers that are there looking. So I don't think it's going to die, and I do feel like cars like the Toyota 86 have allowed a whole new generation of car enthusiasts to feel like they've got an option with a car that's actually somewhat interesting. Yes, it's not fast. Yes, it's not like the most amazing thing, but it's a rear-wheel drive two-door coupe. Like, that didn't exist before the 86 for a long time. You had to go and buy a 200SX or a 180SX or a Skyline or something just to get a car that would do that. There was not many new options around, unless you wanted to drive an MX-5. So I don't think it's going to die. I don't think it's going to die at all. But I also think that with stuff like Uber and the transportation capabilities being so much higher, we need to look outside of Australia, because when you go to Europe in particular, a lot of young people don't bother getting a license because they don't need one. They public transportation in Europe is way better than what we have here. So and cars are quite expensive, and lots of cities have now got like congestion tax and all sorts of other things inside CBDs. So if you don't own an EV, or if you don't own something decent, you're not going to be able to drive in it, and it's going to cost a fortune. So young people just in a lot of European cities, the rate of licensing has dropped massively. So whilst that may not be so relevant here in Australia, because we still need a license to get around and sort of have our freedom growing up, obviously with the market demand dropping in other countries for those sorts of cars, I think it'll eventually have an impact. And you already see that by looking at the secondhand prices of some of those cars I mentioned, the old Nissans. They're still so expensive. I remember when you can get a 180SX for like $3-4 grand. But back when I was in my early 20s, and good luck finding one of that price these days. They're like bloody expensive now. Or like a 300ZX, which I love, by the way. I love that car. I wish they would make that again. So yeah, I don't know. It's I hope so. The answer is I hope so. I hope that the younger generation does fall in love with the car, and that's why, when I do take someone for a drive in one of my cars, and they actually get to experience like the noise and the vibrations and the craziness that goes with being in a car like that, it changes their perspective because they haven't ever felt that a car could be fun. Because you get into a Tesla, Plaid, and you do the 0 to 100 in 2.2 seconds or whatever it is these days. Like, that's cool, and you do it once and you do it twice, and you actually feel car sick, and you're like, I'm not gonna do that again.
Yeah.
The enjoyment is gone. Like, every time I've had a really fast EV, I sort of drive around, I sort of take people for a drive in it, and then for the rest of the time, I don't like to drive it fast at all because it makes me feel sick. My body doesn't feel right going that fast without all the things that come with it. So the enjoyment isn't there, and I think a lot of young people might fall into that trick and go, well, I don't really care about cars, I just want to get from A to B. And maybe it's people like you and I's job to actually, I guess, expose them to what a real car could be like, and what it's like to own a car that makes you feel alive, because that's what it comes down to.
I hope so, and I hope what you said before is correct, that the future of driving is for people who are really enthusiastic about it, so that there's places to go where people can drive quickly, more racetracks, and cars that are built specifically for that purpose. So I could see a future where we've got cars that don't have to have all the emissions and safety gear on them, because they'll be used purely for fun. And
well, it'd also be nice if the government could realize those racetracks do need the exemptions from things like noise. It blows my mind that when I go to Norwell, as an example, you have to lift on the straight.
Yeah.
Because they've got a noise limiter, because someone somewhere in the vicinity has complained and the council has put a noise restriction. Can you imagine telling people, don't drive fast on the road, take it to a track, and then getting to a track and saying, hey, don't go fast because it's going to be noisy? And it's like, hang on, why am I here? Like, what's the point of actually being here? And it's the same with, Lakeside's got similar issues.
Yeah.
We're lucky that Queensland Raceway doesn't, but like, the government's got to grow a spine and go, well, hang on, we can't tell people not to do this on the road and then restrict what they can do on a racetrack as well. Like, something's got to give here, right? So, look, I'm hopeful, but we need a couple of things to go our way. And at the moment, for those of you that don't know, Australia is actually looking to introduce what's called new emission vehicle standards from next year, and in 2026, and they're going to require car companies that don't have emission-friendly cars to actually pay a fine per car they sell where their vehicles emit more. So basically forcing car companies to bring more plug-in hybrids and electric cars to market. And there's a lot of brands out there that don't have these cars. So they're going to be paying fines, which, guess what? They're not going to pay the fines. You and I are going to pay the fines. Yeah. We're going to be the ones that are going to cough the price for these cars being sold. So it's actually going in the opposite direction at the moment. But I'm hopeful with some of the changes in the US and things like that car companies, and in Europe, car companies will come back. I'll say one thing before I go away, which is that the reason I think this will happen is because if we currently rush down the path we're going, which is fully towards EVs, which, by the way, as I said, for transportation is the best option, the car companies from the Western world and Japan are so far behind the Chinese that they will lose that battle. Like, they've already lost that battle, to be fair. Yeah. But the reason that their cars are restricted in Europe and in America is not for some, security reason that they're going to turn your car off when you're driving. It's because they're really good, and they're about a third of the price of the American cars. And if they were to flood the market, companies like Ford, General Motors, they would be out of business. And that's what we're getting here in Australia. Like, I'm driving some of these Chinese EVs around that are like 35 grand. And I'm like, how is this thing cheaper than a Corolla? It's rear-wheel drive. It's electric. It rides better. It drives better. It's got a 10-year warranty. I'm talking about an MG4, for example. It's absurd that it could be cheaper than a Corolla, and it's electric. So that's the reason why I think EVs will eventually take off. If it was a true open free market, the Chinese would own automotive, and they will. There's no way that they will not, in 10, 15 years, make up half of the cars sold in Australia. I have no doubt about it.
Wow. Brave new world.
Brave new world, man. Brave new world.
Fascinating chatting with you, but before I let you go, we've got to wrap it up with your SLS. So we've got this 2010 Mercedes-Benz SLS. It's a classic car. It's only going to go up in value. It's got a thumping 420 kilowatt naturally aspirated V8, only done 16,500 kilometres, been looked after its whole life. The almost $1 million question, how much are you asking for the car?
Well, as I said, I think I've got it listed for like 780 from memory, and I had an offer that was like 750, so or 745, I can't remember, and I still didn't sell it. So I suppose I'm asking for what I've listed it for, but I wouldn't be surprised if you saw that listing disappear at some point. So I'll tell you why I'm selling it, actually, because I don't think we talked about it. And the reason I'm selling it is because I don't drive the car, and I feel bad for it, that it sits there and it gets driven like 100 kilometers a year. And I actually wanted to buy an 812, and I wanted to buy an 812 instead, even though it won't appreciate nearly as much, if at all. But I wanted to buy an 812 and I wanted to do the full Novitec exhaust on it, because that car, every time I hear it with that exhaust, just makes me like little tears come out of joy. So I was like, at least with that car, I'll drive it. And yes, it's not a good investment. And yes, it's not a long-term collector's car like an SLS. But hey, man, life's short. And sometimes you actually want to buy things you're going to drive rather than things that appreciate in value.
Yeah, it's the experience. And absolute final question, will you throw in the book if someone offers you the asking price?
Yes, because I've got two. So Mercedes-Benz gave me two, and they were a gift from Mercedes Australia. And yes, I will give you one of them, along with an original cover.
Alborz, it's been absolutely fascinating chatting with you. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for having me, mate. See you next time.
For the complete details on Alborz Mercedes-Benz SLS AMG, head to performancecarlounge.com.au.